Our subject today is spiritualizing daily life. Last week I spoke about puja, about worship, and primarily ritualistic worship. And we know that that is not the only kind of worship there is. Today I want to talk about another kind of worship, a worship that can be done anywhere and anytime, or anywhere and everywhere, anytime and every time. The term worship, as we generally understand it, and limited to ritualistic worship, often creates a division in our life. Even using the word worship in a more generic sense, in the sense that everything pertaining to our spiritual lives or to our religious life. Even then, we find that for most of us, our life does get divided. So there are things related to spiritual life. Oftentimes, it can become a once-in-a-week event. Sometimes this approach is called the Time magazine approach to things. You know, you have a section on religion, a section on sports, a section on politics. And so our life can sometimes become like that. So we have one day reserved for doing spiritual things, and so on. So in general, we might say our life could get divided between worship and work. By work, I say everything that we do other than our spiritual life. If you kind of put it all together, our life does get divided. And it becomes reinforced also because of the way the structure is. We speak about the separation of state and church. In itself, a wonderful thing, something that is very necessary in social context. But what about our personal context? Should there be this line separating between my spiritual ideal and what I see as my secular ideal? Sometimes in Vedantic understanding, they say that the way to integrate these two compartments of work and worship, it goes through stages. So we learn to do all our work as worship, and when we succeed in doing it, eventually we realize that work is worship. In other words, then everything becomes worship. Then that division goes away. The goal in life is to eliminate all compartmentalization. Sometimes compartmentalization helps, but that's a kind of a short-term benefit. We know that there are certain things we don't want to deal with, or certain things are not relevant in a particular context, and so we say, okay, I'm not going to think about this thing. Which works up to a point, but we know that there are times when these walls are not so rigid, that they are sufficiently porous. By that I mean, we might think that, say, things related to my family will remain within the family. Things related to my workplace will remain within the workplace. Ideally, if it happens that way, it can be helpful. But we know that it doesn't always remain that way. If there is some major upheaval going on in family, then even when I'm in my workplace, those thoughts follow me there. I can't shut them out completely. In the same way, if there is something major happening in my workplace, I can't shut it off when I go back home. So we know that these walls are not really that powerful. And we know that it creates difficulties. It creates difficulties because we have to then deal with things we don't want to deal with. At times we don't want to address them. So the ultimate goal is to break down all walls. But in order to break down all walls, we need to then find a way which will integrate all the disparate parts of our life. our life cannot remain simply a collection of parts. Now, I really basically just put it as two, work and worship. But we can kind of subdivide it. Life can become very fragmented. And sometimes it is said that we have as many parts to our lives, to the distinct social groups we move in. So my workplace could be one part, my family could be one part. Then if I have a friend circle which is not really part of my workplace, that could be a third part. If I'm interested in sports, then my sport buddies could be a different part, and so on. And my life then will be these distinct groups. And in each group, depending on the group I move in, my persona becomes a little different. And sometimes we can look at our own lives. When we go to, say, a place of worship, we dress in a particular way, we are careful to present ourselves in a certain way. We don't necessarily always present ourselves in the same way, let's say when you go to a ball game on Fenway. That's a different context, a different thing, and everything is very different. But yet, we are the same person. It's understandable that we do things in an appropriate way, in an appropriate occasion. And yet, we cannot be having this, say, 10 different masks. Or when you go to Fenway, there's one mask, and you go to a place of worship, a different mask. Because spiritual life is really of removing all masks, not changing masks. Because what is real is what is under the mask, not the masks themselves. And so, spiritualizing daily life would really mean looking at the different masks that we have, and to begin by minimizing these masks and ultimately removing these masks, because we need to know ourselves. When we look in the mirror, we want to look at who we really are, not at, if you just put a big mask and look in the mirror, you really won't see yourself, you're just going to see the mask. That's the idea. So a life cannot be then just a collection of these different parts of our personality and of different parts of our life. They cannot be just collection of just fragments. Think about, well, everyone goes to see movies. Nowadays, you don't even need to go out. You can just watch it on your TV or on a computer. Now, what is the difference between a good movie and a bad movie? In a general sense, we might say a movie is not simply a collection of a bunch of scenes. If these different scenes are just completely unconnected, then the result would be like, at the end of it, you'll say, I've just wasted my time. I had no idea what was going on. But on the other hand, if each of those scenes is interconnected, there is some relationship, and the whole of it put together becomes one whole story. It has some narrative, something to convey. Then at the end of it, it can be a very wonderful experience. And that's what we call a good movie, where each scene, each character has something to contribute to the story. And if it's all of it is done well, that movie might even get an Oscar. Now, if we look back at our own life, what kind of a story we want our own life to be? Just a collection of unconnected events, unconnected interests, unconnected groups that we are a part of? Then at the end of a life, we just look at the life and say, well, this is what my life has been. And it cannot be. Not only will it not be a good movie, it will not be satisfying, just as seeing a bad movie won't be satisfying. So what we need to ask are all the parts of my life integrated well? An integrated life is an authentic life. And for those of us who see ourselves as spiritual seekers, we must ask ourselves, is my life authentic? And what does an authentic life of a spiritual seeker would mean? It primarily would mean that if I'm a spiritual seeker, I'm a spiritual seeker everywhere. Not just once a week, not just when I'm in a place of worship, but even when other places. It's possible to go and enjoy a good ball game at Fenway by being a completely, authentically spiritual person. It's possible to go and enjoy your shopping experience by being a spiritual person. It's possible to do everything, no matter what you're doing at any time, whether it's at home or outside. It's possible to maintain the identity that I'm a spiritual person and do it. Then my life will become authentic. Sometimes, some worldly people, by worldly I mean those whose goals are entirely materialistic, sometimes they can be really very authentic people. So even when very materialistic people go to worship, even when such people pray, their prayers can be very materialistic. Their approach to going to a place of worship can be very materialistic. So they are authentically materialistic everywhere. Exactly in the same way, if we want to be authentically spiritual, we have to be spiritual everywhere. There is no such thing as a part-time spirituality. So if we are, and no need to be upset if we find that presently, well, we are kind of part-time spiritual. We don't feel ourselves spiritual all the time. We are not aware of our spiritual identity all the time, which is fine. So right now we know that there is this inner division. But it's also good to know the ideal, that at some point we want to have one personality. And if we are spiritual, our goal is to be spiritual everywhere, all the time. So life can be seen, one way of looking at life is that it's a jigsaw puzzle. And all these different fragments that I saw, as mentioned earlier, whether in terms of different people in our lives or different places or the different kinds of activities that we are engaged in, each of these is a separate piece in the jigsaw puzzle. And we know that what do we do? If you get a jigsaw puzzle as a gift, we need to put all the pieces together. And if they fit perfectly well, then it's a beautiful picture. Oftentimes when we are young, all of us have sometime or the other done these puzzles. It's a little bit easier then because we separately have the final picture of how the final picture is going to look like. And then we have these pieces. So we have some clue about which piece will go where. Our present difficulty is, as far as our lives are concerned, we don't know yet what the final picture is going to be, and yet we have these pieces. So it is a matter of trial and error. We have to see which piece fits in where. Sometimes we get it right, sometimes we don't get it right. Perhaps we are able to fit in, say, 70% of the pieces of our life. Maybe 30% are still, we are trying to figure out where it fits. And that's what more or less happens in the lives of us, most of us, is that we find a part of our life is well integrated. And some other part we are still trying to figure out how does everything fit in. Ideally, what happens is this, that we are able to kind of figure out more or less in our life at the present stage where these different pieces fit together. Maybe the picture is not yet completely perfect, but more or less some kind of equilibrium is established. Some kind of a picture does emerge. Unfortunately, it's not a very stable picture. By that I mean, when some major changes occur in our lives, either in our personal life or in a life immediately surrounding us, maybe family or friends or our work, some major upheavals take place directly related to us, then that picture kind of comes apart again. And sometimes some of the pieces disappear. Sometimes when we lose somebody, a person near to us passes away. Now the person never really totally disappears. Even when someone close to us dies, the physical absence is there, but the memory remains. But still, there's some changes undergone into that among the pieces of puzzle that I had. And sometimes new pieces will get added. There is a new baby at home, or you have some, through many different ways, new pieces get added to our lives. And so again, so that kind of equilibrium that had been established again gets disturbed, because then we have to fit in these new places somewhere. So that's, our life can then be seen as a continual effort to put together the different pieces of our lives. And who do we then say is an enlightened being? An enlightened being is one who has succeeded in putting all the pieces of the life together in a perfect way. And the end picture is perfect. It's beautiful, and the pieces are so perfectly welded together that they are not going to come apart again. And then that's an enlightened being, because the complete stability and equilibrium has been attained. And right now we are trying to attain that equilibrium, trying to attain that stability. So how do we then learn how to put these pieces of our life together and make our life integrated, make our life whole, make our life undivided? And that becomes easier when we instill some inner discipline in our lives. So the handouts that you were given when you came in, provides you one template of how to do it. But that's only a sample, a method. That's not some kind of some established dogma or a doctrine that this is what you got to believe. It's not that. It's just one template, one way of doing it. And you can customize it according to your needs. You can make whatever changes you want. But this is one way of doing it. As I said, the one major challenge for spiritual seekers is how do we remain aware of our identity as spiritual seekers throughout the day. If I see myself as a devotee of God, as a believer in God, as someone who has faith in God, how can I maintain that awareness that I'm a spiritual seeker, that I'm a seeker of truth, that I'm a devotee all through the day? There are times when we remember it, of course, when we pray, when we meditate, when we are in a place of worship. It's easy to remember, yes, I'm a spiritual seeker, I'm a devotee. It's not so easy to remember that when you're driving, especially if there is a red light, or especially someone cuts way. Then we forget that we are spiritual seekers. Then we kind of have a different identity that time. So how do we then remember that all the time? And that becomes rather easier if we instill some kind of an inner discipline. So the handout that you have essentially shows that this can be done in three steps, twice a day. As you can see, but before you look into the handout, look at me first. Don't look at the handout right now. So let me just give you a broad outline of how it will be. So as spiritual seekers, oftentimes we are told that while you meditate, you pray, and that involves closing your eyes, trying to shut the world out, and looking within. But we also are told that God is everywhere, the Spirit is everywhere. And so we cannot really remain with closed eyes, with shut doors and windows all through the day. Not possible, not practicable, not advisable either. So we have to find a way of how, as we encounter the Spirit, the divine in our heart, how can I then make myself strong enough? How can I develop in myself that capacity to feel the presence of the Spirit or the divine in my heart even when I open my eyes, even when I go about dealing with 100 other things in the course of my day? So we begin with meditation, looking in. Then we begin with, then the next step is kind of stepping out a little bit and doing a kind of inner worship. Sometimes that inner worship is called a yajna, kind of an inner sacrifice. We are presently dealing with that on our in the study group, in the Gita that we have on every Wednesday evening, the chapter 3 and chapter 4 deal with precisely this. It's called the yajna, of how to do that inner sacrifice. So meditation, then we do this inner worship, and then as we open our eyes and go throughout the day to do the various work that we need to do to carry out our duties and responsibilities, we then are able to do the outer sacrifice or outer worship. So meditation, inner worship, outer worship. So this is one set that we do in the morning. And then in the evening, we go in the reverse order. So that's basically what this handout is. I don't intend to go through it in word by word. You can read it for yourself. But very briefly, so as you can see, waking up, one good practice that I have often referred to on earlier occasions as well is to make a good beginning. Isn't there a saying like, well begun is half done? And that's very true. Those of us who have tried to lead life with a spiritual discipline know that if we can begin the day, the first thought, as soon as I wake up, even you have not even got out of your bed yet, you are asleep and you wake up. So the first thought, if it's possible, that the first thought is about your spiritual ideal. Maybe you just remember your mantra or your prayer. And maybe the first thing, as your eyes open, you look at something that reminds you of your spiritual ideal. So maybe a picture or a symbol connected with your spiritual ideal next to your bed. Now, it makes a huge difference. Try it out. Sometimes it may not be easy. If you haven't done it before, if you're beginning, sometimes it may not be that easy. You see, this is much better than beginning the day with, oh my God, I'm late, I've got to go. Well, you're still, if you say, oh my God, it's still better. But instead of beginning the day with like, oh, this is unfinished, I've got to run, which eventually we have to. But why not begin the day just with first thought, think about God, think about prayer, think about your mantra. And as I said, you don't even have to get out of your bed. Just as your eyes are open, make a conscious effort. If you feel in the beginning, if it's helpful to you, maybe just put a sticky note next to your bed to kind of remind you, oh, this is what I need to do. And then you can quietly get up from your bed, mentally bow down to the whichever form of God that you worship, and as you see, a self-surrender. Surrender your body, mind, and spirit to your ideal, and seek God's guidance and support throughout the day. So make this kind of a short inner prayer even before you have got out of your bed. And then, of course, then you can get up, then whatever things you need to do in the morning, you brush your teeth, take a shower, or whatever you do, freshen up, and then you can come and then sit and do meditation. Now, many of us here have received instructions from our spiritual teacher or guru. So follow the instructions that you have received from your teacher. Go through all the steps, the method that your teacher has taught you, and practice that meditation. After doing that, at the end of that meditation, then we come to the inner worship. That's called yajna or sacrifice. So what we do is simply our heart, that we look at the heart which as a seat of consciousness, the light of consciousness, and we make an offering. Just as, and as I mentioned it briefly last Sunday when I spoke about puja, just as we make offering of flowers and sweets externally, as sometimes the offering is made in a fire worship called the homa, that you usually put ghee or bilwa leaves in a sanctified fire in the middle. We can now, in the light of consciousness, we make an offering. And offering is actually a set of affirmation, a set of rules that we can make for ourselves. So what is given here, there are essentially just 11 points: waking up, meditation, work, study, food, conduct, service, mindfulness, love of God, chastity, egolessness. So these are some points, again, as I said, according to your own needs and according to your own interests and according to your own spiritual training. Feel free to make whatever changes you want. But it's good to have some self-imposed discipline here. We hate rules being imposed upon us from outside, and Vedanta hates it too. What Vedanta says is, look in your heart, that recognize that you are the creator of your own destiny, that your future is in your own hands. So if something goes great in your life, no need to thank anybody. You have worked hard for it. But also, if something doesn't go well, then no need to blame anybody either. So whether it is something good or bad, each of us has contributed something to it. And so we, therefore, it's extremely empowering. It just shows that forces outside me may try to influence the course of my life, but I'm not a helpless victim in the hands of those forces. If I want, I can summon up all the strength, all the courage, which is already in my heart, and then take charge of my own life. So this practice here is an affirmation, is an affirming my own willpower to say, I want to be in charge of my life. I don't want myself to be a victim of external forces. I don't want others to tell me what to do, and the best way not to give an opportunity for others to tell me what to do is that I tell myself what to do. And so these are the ways we can think about it. So make these few rules, self-made rules, something that you believe is in harmony with your ideal, is in harmony with what you want to achieve in life. So the rules that are made here are more or less according to the insights we find in Vedanta, and especially in the teachings of Ramakrishna, Holy Mother, and Swamiji. And clearly, as you can see, all of these rules don't come into conflict with the teachings of any other tradition as well, as far as I can see. So again, affirming these rules is making a resolution to yourself that in the course of the day, this is what I wish to do, and this is what I seek God's help and guidance for, that this is what my intention is. So it is affirming my intention of how I intend to live that day. After making that, and after seeking God's guidance and help, then you get up and then you go and carry out all the duties, all the responsibilities you have that day. Then, when the major activity of the day is over, you go home again, and then again you go in the reverse order then. So one way is to review all the activities that happened that day and see where you went wrong and where you were right. When you discover at the end of the day that, well, there were things that you are happy that you did those things which were, in a way that should be done. But that's something that can be very satisfying. That these things I did are expressed the ideal that I stand for perfectly. You see, what is an authentic life? That what I think should be a perfect expression of who I am. What I say should be a perfect expression of who I am. What I do should be a perfect expression of what I am. Then it's an authentic life. On the other hand, if I think in one way, I say something else, and I do yet something else, then it's not authentic. So that's the idea. What Ramakrishna taught was, he used to say, there is a phrase in Bengali which says, to making the mind and speech one. It really means bringing together our thoughts, words, and actions. When they are in harmony, our life becomes filled with harmony. So we can review at the end of the day, review all the day's activities, find out where you are right, find out which things you could have done better, find out which things you really messed up, which is fine. Once I know the mistakes that I have done that day, I know then what I should do next day. And the simple thing I should do next day is not to do the mistakes I did today. And if I succeed in not repeating my mistakes, I've already become a little better. So as I often say, do all the mistakes you can, but every time do original mistakes. And that's another one discovery also. We all make mistakes in life. Everyone makes mistakes. So no need to be apologetic if you make mistakes. But it's good to ask, how many of the mistakes I did today are the mistakes I have not done before? And we might discover that most of the mistakes we did today are the mistake I did yesterday, or last week, or last year, or 10 years ago, which means I'm not yet learned. So now, today, if I have discovered it's a mistake, then tomorrow I can be extra careful to see that I should not make that mistake again. So I know what I should do next day. For instance, if today I find that I have lost my temper, got angry, and at the end of the day I feel I shouldn't have lost my temper. So I know that was a mistake to do it. Then the next day I know. And once I know what my weakness is, the next day I can be especially careful to see I don't lose my temper. And if I can live without losing my temper for a day or two or three, I'm all on the path to recovery. So that's how we improve. So all of the scientific discoveries and inventions, don't think that at the first go everything succeeded. Thousands of times experiments fail. Unfortunately, the failures never get reported in the journals, only the success. But behind every success, all successes are built on hundreds and thousands of failures. So failures are not a problem. What is a problem is not learning from our mistakes, not learning from our failure. So that's the principle behind reviewing the activity. Again, reviewing the activity doesn't mean obsessing over it. Like, don't spend 2 hours thinking, oh my God, I shouldn't have done it. That's not the thing. So just review the day's activities in a kind of a fast-forward mode. It shouldn't really take even 5 minutes or 10 minutes. So don't obsess over what's done is done. So you don't have to obsess over it, but just look at it. And it's almost like a quick review of the day's activities. Then you do the inner yajna again. Go through, and one way actually, the inner worship that we did, all these 10 or 11 or whatever number of points that you have, itself can become a way of reviewing the day. So when you kind of go through these points, then you will know, well, did I live up to the affirmations I made this morning? And then I know, well, I need to take, say, extra care of number 5. So I'll be very careful, and so on. So the inner worship that you do, it can be combined with the review of the day's activities, and then we meditate again. So it's like this. So first, we begin the day with meditation, inner worship, external work. At the end of the day, we review what happened external work, we go to inner worship, and then end it with meditation. So it's the awareness from in, we go out, spend the day, at the end of the day, we go in again. Now, the review of activities can also be done before you go to bed. So there isn't a very rigid rule about it. Just see whatever works best for you. And just as we did in the morning, just as we begin the day thinking about God, the first thought should be about spiritual ideal. The first thing my eyes see is something connected with my spiritual ideal. The first sound should be the sound of my mantra or a prayer. Try to, and it's probably should be easier than in the morning. Try to see that the last thing your eyes see before closing your eyes is something connected with your spiritual ideal. So again, it's helpful if near your bed you have something to remind you of that. Then you look at it and then switch off the lights. How can we be sure that the last thought I think before falling asleep is of God? And think think about either just repeat your mantra, or think about incidents, or whatever it is that keeps you holding closer to the spiritual ideal. And if you fall asleep, say during Sunday satsangs, then think about the satsang. You will get a good sleep. You might be, if you have difficulty falling asleep. You will see oftentimes that if you are able to kind of glide into sleep, thinking about the spiritual things, you will surprise yourself. You will find yourself waking up sooner or later, hopefully sooner, that even without making a conscious effort, the first thought will be related to God. It's almost like sometimes, it's a little bit like sometimes you say there's some big file to be downloaded or something, application. So what do? Or a big operating system. So you don't want to waste your time in the daytime. So you just kind of start downloading at night. And when you wake up in the morning, you find it's complete. So it's a little bit like that. So if when we are thinking about God, and then we kind of glide into sleep, when you sleep, it doesn't always completely stop. At some finer, deeper layer of the mind, it's kind of still going on. And so when you wake up in the morning, it comes out again. Now that may not happen in a day or two, so don't be discouraged if it doesn't. But those who have practiced this for a sustained amount of time have found that the mantra or the prayer can be your companion all the time. It's like at some level of your mind, it will be continually going on. So every time you dip into it, you suddenly discover it's there. It's almost like you have these some websites or some sports sites, or even I like the streaming that is now we are doing. So what the site really does, it's continually refreshing itself, and so that's what happens. So even when we fall asleep, the process is already going on. When you wake up in the morning, you find it's already refreshed itself. And that can be extremely, the joy that you will feel. Just think about it this way. You wake up in the morning, and even without your conscious effort, you immediately think about God. You immediately think about your spiritual ideal. That can be so powerful. It can be the joy that you get when that happens. I don't think any joy that we have had so far can compare to it. Not even a joy of the tiramisu. This is much superior even to that. So that's something. So take when you afterwards, I would encourage you to kind of go through this and see how this can be incorporated into your own spiritual discipline, in your spiritual practice. At the back of that, you will see that this is a thing related specifically to work. Many of us have issues related with work. By issues, I mean that our work exhausts us, our work increases our stress, our anxiety, and so how can we do our work so that instead of it becoming something that, a factor that kind of takes away all joy from my life, to a factor that can bring me joy in my life. Because work is exhausting, because it's not so fun, that is why we look forward to weekends. Because weekends are a time, I don't have to work today. Especially if it's a long weekend, it's even great fun. Now it's nothing wrong in looking forward to the weekends, but it also means, unfortunately, weekends are only 2 days in a week. So that leaves us 5 days. So if I'm looking forward to the weekends, what I'm also saying that the 5 days of my week are not so much fun, that I need those weekends. Now, is there any way out? Is that, or it's something like that's we are condemned to, that's it, just weekends are yours, 5 days don't belong to you? Or can I change my attitude toward work? Can I change the mindset that I have toward the work, by which even those 5 days become as enjoyable as the 2 weekends? And practice of karma yoga is what does it. Karma yoga is a way which shows that the work is not only a means to something. Right now, that is what it is. For most of us, and we all have to work, work used in a very generic sense as the Gita does it, of course. Even getting up in the morning is work. Brushing your teeth is work. And so, activity, none of us can live without activity. But even taking work in a more limited sense, work that we do, say, to earn our livelihood, to pay our bills, to take care of our families, and so on, how can we make that work not simply as a means to something else, but as a source of joy itself? So it's not that, clearly, of course, you do some work and you do it well and it's successful, it's going to make you happy, which is great. But what about the activity itself? Actually, you can get double the joy. For instance, you're doing some work. That doing the work itself can bring me joy, and if it's successful, that's a bonus. But if it's not successful, it's not a total loss either, because at least you have enjoyed doing the work. And so that's the point. How can I enjoy the work that I do? And a day might come that you start enjoying your work so much, you, instead of looking forward to a Saturday, you might be looking forward to a Monday. Everyone's very silent. I mean, think about it. I mean, if you really enjoy the work, not doing the work would be a punishment, right? So how do we go about it? And so here you find on the back of that handout, on page 2, similarly, the kind of resolves we can do before we begin the major activity of the day. And then at the end, again, reviewing all the work that has occurred. This is taken from the book that we have. It's on page 68 and 71, Walking the Walk. That gives a commentary on what Swami Vivekananda taught in his book, Karma Yoga. So there are ways. So whatever is given in your handout, as I said, it's only a sample. And feel free to customize it to your own specific needs. But having some kind of a self-discipline, having some kind of an ideal to work toward in life is very necessary for spiritual seekers. Swami Vivekananda said that if a person with an ideal makes 100 mistakes, a person without an ideal will make 1,000 mistakes. So having this ideal, having this discipline does not guarantee that you won't make mistakes. Clearly, we are all going to make mistakes. But one thing we know, if we have some such self-disciplining measures instituted in our life, voluntarily and designed by yourself, you will make, first of all, fewer mistakes as compared to those who don't have such a thing. But more than that, inbuilt into this is the chance, the opportunity to review your mistakes, to correct yourself, and to become a better person. That is why Sri Ramakrishna used to say, as long as I live, so long do I learn. So we need to keep on learning. And this learning doesn't have to come only from books. In fact, very little learning comes from books. The real learning is from life itself. And not simply learning from other people's lives. Why not learn from our own lives as well? So the more we are able to look at our own lives, learn the lessons that we have, even look at other people's lives, learn the lessons. Not everything needs to be learned only through our own lives. Look at the lives of people who lived 500 years ago. That's what history is for. History can be a very boring subject. I mean, what does it matter which year, which king lived? We think like it's so pointless. But it's not about the years and dates and which year, which war took place. No, it's looking at the lives. We're dealing with people who dealt with real life situations. So, and we might think, well, the society was much different then. Even then, the human drama is essentially not very different today than it was even 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago. There is still, externally things have changed, yes, but internally the The love, friendship, hatred, good, bad, jealousy, envy, the quest for power, the exploitation, everything. The good and bad that exists now is a good and bad that has existed all through history, which is not a very comforting thought if you believe that one day everything is going to be good. But that's a different subject. But very briefly, what it means is that we don't know whether everything is going to be good at some point outside, because that is based on the assumption that good is somehow an ever-increasing entity and evil is somehow an ever-decreasing entity. It hasn't happened so far. I'm a bit skeptical. But looking at the good and bad outside, if we can learn our lessons, it's possible to eliminate all weaknesses from our heart. It's possible to eliminate all evil from our heart. It's possible to become good, and then that's not the end. Once we become good, once we are able to eliminate that evil from our heart, we then need to transcend our own goodness and reach that stage in life which is beyond good and bad, beyond all these polarities. That is why in the Upanishad we read, in the Katha Upanishad, Nachiketa asks Yama, said, tell me that truth of the self which is beyond dharma and beyond adharma, beyond good and beyond bad. So that's the goal. But right now, we have to begin by taking care of our lives. One final thought. Before we try to set other people's lives all right, let us, each of us, try to set our own life all right. The problem with the world today is too many people are busy telling other people what they should do. They're not spending enough time looking at their own life and see what I should be doing. If we spend some time every day, even if it's few minutes, looking at our life and say, this is my life. What things have I been doing right? What things have I been doing wrong? And is there any way that I can improve the quality of my life? Is there any way I can become a better human being? Is there any way I can transcend my own limitations? And one who is successful in doing it, even if it's very gradual, is a person who is progressing in spiritual life. One who completely succeeds in doing it has become enlightened. And what Vedanta tells us is that each of us has that capacity in full. All of us have that power within us to transcend our own limitation. All of us have the power within us to become enlightened. We just have to manifest that power. And the first step towards doing it is to have some kind of an inner discipline. And if we can do that, we will find not only our daily life, but our entire existence can get completely spiritualized. Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhur Muhu. We bow down to Sri Ramakrishna and Holy Mother again and again.